Well, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Industrial Real Estate Show. I'm very pleased to be joined by a fellow SIOR, Trey Pennington, out of Greenville, South Carolina. And Trey, well, first of all, thanks so much for joining me on here.
Yeah, hey, glad to have it. Love your show, Chad, and I love what you're doing for industrial real estate. Like, it's so cool to have a database and your Facebook page, some of the media you put out there that brings all this stuff together, like racking and logistics and steel manufacturing and stuff like that. So thank you for doing that.
Well, yeah, it's an honor to have you on here. And for people that love industrial real estate, there's not a lot of resources. So it's an honor of mine to contribute a little bit to people that are interested in it, like yourself and me. And just having you on here is awesome because your background is super impressive. So 3 undergraduate degrees, you have an MBA and a law degree. You've been at CBRE since 2007. Fellow SIOR, as we mentioned, and you're also executive vice chairman. So that is a super impressive background and resume. Let's start right at the beginning. What got you into industrial real estate in the first place?
Well, yeah, I went to South Carolina. It's a good business school. I didn't really know what I wanted to do, honestly, but I liked law. I liked business. I knew they kind of touched each other. And so I wanted to kind of figure out how to leverage that. And then I was always kind of fascinated by real estate. I had no background in that, but got into the programs there, the international business program. They got a job at KPMG. I quickly learned that I am not a Big Four accounting firm guy. So I figured that out quickly, and then pivoted and started interviewing with the real estate companies. I was now or never, and ended up being interviewed and meeting a mentor of mine, a guy named Steve Navarro, and said, I'm going to go do this for 3 years. That was in April of 2007. Shortly thereafter, the bottom fell out of the market, and I'm trying to scratch and claw and doing 2,500 square foot metal buildings, trying to get a deal to come together. But it was it was another proverbial MBA in real estate, trying to figure that out in the blocking and tackling of it. So that's how I got started in it. Love the industrial, and it's just kind of grown from there.
So you've been with CBRE your entire career, right from 2007?
Yeah, so the firm that hired me was not CBRE, but was eventually acquired by CBRE. So
gotcha.
Same desk, different names, but yeah.
So you started with doing a lot of that small bay industrial, which surprisingly is the hottest thing in the market right now.
No, someone knows the back then. I figured out how to.
Yeah, no kidding. So I know that you've transitioned a lot more into the big box warehousing. You do a lot of logistics and big box warehousing. What was that move like, going from doing small bay to now doing large big box warehousing?
Yeah, I think we still do a lot. I've got a partner, Trip Speaks, that helps set this call up, that does a lot of the mid-size, small stuff. I think it was just an evolution, Chad, from kind of my background, and then matching that with real estate, and then some of the opportunities I had. It was kind of turns into corporate real estate advisory, multi-market stuff, and those companies got bigger, and then we ended up getting involved in some of those national site selection projects, and kind of advising them from a strategic standpoint. And then, of course, understanding that we still do a lot of agency work here in the upstate of South Carolina. And as that exploded, we've certainly had some opportunities to advise from the other end of the developers, where to go and what to underwrite, and why it may make sense to do something a little bit bigger. And in the Southeast, the growth has had a lot to do with that. So just right place, right time a little bit.
Well, yeah, I think it was Larry King that said that anybody who's succeeded at anything and doesn't attribute some of it to luck is kidding themselves. I think luck and good timing, and you have to be prepared, right? Like your sports background, you'd know this as well. You have to be prepared. You can't just go onto a field and expect luck to do all the work for you. But luck does play a big element to it.
It does. Honestly, I didn't want to. I was looking to go international or go to a big market, go work for a big, investment real estate firm. And honestly, I grew up here in the upstate in Anderson, and I was like, well, that wasn't part of my checklist, is like not going home. I wasn't excited about it, but man, somebody knew better. The big guy was looking out for me, because it started growing, and 2011, 12, it really started booming. It's been a great place, and now that we're doing stuff, globally or North America, you see the fundamentals of it. And you couldn't have, it's probably my best site selection project coming to work here in the upstate of South Carolina. And it was completely by accident. So very fortunate.
I do want to jump into all of that you mentioned. First, we'll get maybe a little bit more overview on the Carolinas. I'm one of them myself. I've actually, one of the few places in the U.S. I haven't been to is the Carolinas. So I'd love to just learn. Well, absolutely. Well, next time we do an interview, we'll do it in person. So then it'll give me a reason to be there. So I do want to jump into that, but I also even want to take a bit broader of an approach and just talk about big box warehousing and some of the negativity that's been in the news on that for a lot of vacancy right now and slow absorption and pressure on that, and just really get your insider take on that. But first, I would love just to hear more about the Carolinas. If you're given a pitch to somebody, perhaps it's a company that's looking to expand, maybe they're based in California and they need to get a presence in the East Coast, what would be your pitch, I guess, for lack of a better term, on the Carolinas?
Yeah, I think this goes both generally true for North Carolina as well, and then the various markets in South Carolina, although it'd be a little bit upstate focused, we're kind of along the 85 corridor. But I mean, I think I would just sum it up in the bullet points, going down the scorecard of what those companies look for. And we're talking about labor. We're talking about, critical mass of industry. We're talking about utilities, and the cost of utilities is lower here. We're talking about cost of living and somewhere they would actually want to live. And then you get into the economic, political kind of arena where the economic development, whether it's incentives or just the ease of doing business. And so I think that's, would be my bullet points that I would start expanding on from there. But it just checks all the boxes. And then with the population growth in the U.S. and some of the migration patterns that have happened, the Southeast has just continued to grow and become more and more of a destination for people to live. And a lot of those people have a lot of skills that are valuable to the manufacturers here. So it becomes a natural, evolution. So great place to do business. Really, really one of the best in the U.S.
When companies are looking at the Carolinas, do they focus in on the big hubs? Like, are they saying Raleigh in North Carolina, or are they looking specifically in Greenville, or how do they make the decision? Is it usually based around a larger hub?
Yeah, you get a little bit of nuances in that. I mean, there's certainly some expertise that's concentrated, like Raleigh would be, more of the life sciences industry. But if you're talking about kind of generic real estate supply chain, the basic stuff, a lot of the main stuff that we do, it used to be kind of a spoken hub system where they were going to Atlanta and then they were going to radiate out from Atlanta. Maybe that became Charlotte eventually. But now it's really the companies are becoming more and more sophisticated with their supply chain design, and they're realizing the advantages that are here in the upstate. And a couple of those advantages, just from a FedEx, UPS, kind of their 1, 2 day, 3 day delivery patterns. This ends up being one of the top places in the Southeast over Atlanta and Charlotte very often, depending on some of the variables. And then you've got the port system here, which has just it's really been a game changer. And that port system that radiates out of Charleston, South Carolina, is it's the 8th biggest port in the U.S. It's the deepest port. It's an ocean port, which means it's not a 2-lane highway. It's a 6-lane highway where ships are coming in and out, and very business friendly. And then the extension of that Port Charleston is the South Carolina inland port of Greer. They've got two inland ports. One's in Dillon, lower part of the state, but the one, just a model of success of how to do an inland port has been here. So I think that really contributes to the supply chain risk mitigation. There's efficiencies as the ocean carriers and the rail lines have learned how to use that, and the companies therefore get some of those savings passed to them. So I think that, from, the Carolinas, where it is, the ability to reach, 2/3 of the population in a 2-day truck drive and about 1/3 of it in a day. And then you've got some of these different modes of transportation that can create some efficiencies. I think that's something from, a very specific supply chain perspective makes a lot of sense.
How would you describe the market fundamentals right now? And I know one thing that we'll talk about is delineating between big box warehousing and the small and medium stuff. And with Trip being on your team and you guys have an exposure to all of that, you'd have a pretty good sense on this. But there's a big difference between a 500,000 square foot warehouse and a 5,000 square foot single bay. And the fundamentals are completely different as well. So I don't want to just say, well, what's the vacancy rate? Because there could be two completely different vacancy rates. But how would you describe the fundamentals of the market right now?
Yeah, I'd say that generally the fundamentals along kind of what we were talking about here, kind of outlined a little bit ago, is they're pretty good. I mean, this great place to do business. The where we are, kind of the static kind of snapshot. We are a little bit overserved in terms of 400,000 square foot and greater. I mean, this was a market where a lot of the institutional developers would say, hey, we're going to go to Atlanta. We're going to focus on Charlotte. Now they've kind of gotten the message starting in, really 2011, between 2011 and 13, and they just had success after success here. Well, that snowballed after 2020, especially. We were already kind of healthy, and we got a little bit overbuilt in terms of the 400 to million square footers, like a lot of places. So I'd say that we're still chewing through that. I think that where we are at the end of last year, we absorbed a little over 4 million square feet just in Q4. Total, our market's about 242 million square feet total. We absorbed about 7.5 million square feet net. The way CB does it. And so we had, it's like our third best year ever after a couple of the COVID years. And so we're chewing through that space. We've got a little ways to go for 400 and up. For really 300 and down, we're anticipating some scarcity this year in the back half of the year. And so, when we read these reports, we skim these reports, and we're all guilty of it, including myself, and you kind of just get the taglines. But as you know, you got to really dig into the markets. And we did a space analysis. It was really for our sanity check, but it's turned out to be a really good data point for some of our clients. And what we discovered is that we've got about 3 million square feet of space, that's 30 to 200,000 square feet, is Class A. And what we realize is about 2 million of that is right around kind of the core market, which for us is the Spartanburg West submarket. That's where BMW, the Inland Port, FedEx Ground, and the GSP International Airport are. So the kind of ground zero for our market. There's about 2 million square feet there, and there's, a couple of deals get done, there's going to be less than 400,000 square feet outside of that area. And so that's not going to be enough to serve what we think is typically 3.5 to 4 million square feet of space that gets done, that gets leased every year in that range. So that's why we think there's going to be some scarcity, and we're anticipating a few new spec buildings, despite some of the pain that the developers have had for the big box stuff over the past 18 months.
Yeah, so it's similar to storylines all over other markets in North America, where there's been that appetite to just build. Developers saw this huge demand in 2020, 2021, and they thought that would just continue, so they built accordingly. You have too much supply, demand falters or perhaps even declines a little bit, and then you have this glut, and then you compound it with no new development because interest rates have gone up 300 basis points. Is that the storyline similar to what you've seen in the Carolinas then?
Yeah, that certainly is. We chewed through a little bit of the million square footers. In the fourth quarter here, we had 2 deals done in that range, a logistics company and actually another automotive manufacturer, or assembly operation. So yeah, we're definitely seeing that. The carry cost took on a different level of headache for some of these developers, for that, especially for the big box stuff. But the smaller, mid-sized stuff for us is plus or minus 200,000. We're seeing there's a new deal structure that's being struck with some of these, the lenders and the capital partners. It's a little bit more expensive. I'll push the rates a little bit. But we're seeing that, we're actually surprised that we're seeing some of that so soon. But we think it's needed, so we're excited about it.
There's that car brand, Scout Motors, which was acquired by Volkswagen, I believe, and they're rebooting it. Is that in the Carolinas or is that in Georgia? I don't recall exactly where it was.
I think that was in Georgia. I don't think it's not in South Carolina, and I don't know that it is in North Carolina. Scout Motors was the big announcement here, most recently north of Columbia in a region called Blythewood, and that's owned by Volkswagen as well. So that's going to be a big project. And then the Southeast is really, I mean, that's another whole episode. There is the migration of the automotive industry in the U.S. Really from the Midwest into the Southeast here. So there's a lot of cars that flow through these ports here.
And you probably get a lot of the ancillary businesses too, like the gigafactories for battery production and different components. So yeah, I've heard a lot of going into the East in general from that.
Yeah. I mean, just, the big story here, one of the big economic development wins that came here was BMW. BMW's North American manufacturing facilities here. They make all the X vehicles, so the SUVs. And they came, I think it was announced in 92. They were operational in 94. And now they're exporting, I forget the exact number, 475,000 cars a year out of this facility. Most of those are going to Europe and Asia. And they've been a huge success. They came here to plug into, and this is something that is important to understand about our market in the region. They came here, they plugged into the infrastructure that was already here. There was the legacy of the textile manufacturing world. When that vacated, it was tough times, but there was a lot of engineering expertise here, and there was a lot of infrastructure and power and water. They plugged into that. They've been a game changer, and I think they're up to approximately 200 suppliers that are here. And it's a ripple effect to that because, the other OEMs, they might not want to be next door to BMW, but they want to be close proximity to a built-out supplier network, and that snowballs. So that's been a big blessing for the Southeast in general, and specifically for Reynolds Farber.
Yeah, that's great insight on that. I want to pull up a chart, Wyatt, if you're able to pull this up, the graphic that I sent you. So this just put out by CoStar. Adrian, who's actually a member of our insiders group here, is the author on this. And I just thought that this was a fascinating stat, that the most distribution centers that have sat vacant for more than 18 months. And further down in the article, which Wyatt doesn't have access because I just screenshotted this, but further down in the article, they said that this is the most or the longest it's ever been since CoStar started tracking this data 20 years ago. So there's some pain in the warehousing side. It's not evenly distributed. I think some markets like Dallas and Phoenix have really overbuilt and are continuing to build a ton of spec inventory. I don't think this will be the same story in every market, but this is clearly an interesting trend. So I'm hitting you with this, assuming that you haven't read this. It just came out. I don't know if it's got a ton of exposure yet, but I do find this very fascinating. I just want to get your thoughts on it for first glance. What do you see when you see a statistic like this that says these big box warehouses are sitting vacant for a year and a half or longer?
Yeah, I mean, it's shocking, and I know that this is creating some consternation from a lot of our clients. And we've got a couple of million square footers that we're marketing. One is Smith Farms, and we're kind of pushing this timeline. They may have that in there. What we're seeing is, the dynamics of that deal and carrying it are more expensive, but we're actually seeing a little bit of another wave of these million square footers, or let's call it 500 or greater, coming into the market. So there's a little bit of optimism, at least in our market I can speak of. But there's a lot more million square footers that have been built across the U.S. than seems to be absorbed. I mean, and your career, you've had a great career. how many guys do million square footers on a, annual basis?
Just very rare.
Yeah, it's not an annual thing for the guys. So, I think we're seeing a lot of these guys. Most of the guys here feel like they've got enough momentum and the fundamentals are good that we're going to lease up. And for our projects, we've got a couple of prospects each. We'll sit there work out. But there's some in some other markets where they're sitting 6 or 8 buildings deep, and there's a lot of concern that they're kind of going, who's going to lease this? So it's a real challenge. And then what happens next? I mean, then the capital markets and the debt. The next time there may be a need for the big box, it seemed to have fallen out of favor with some of the debt. Can they get it done then? And what's that look like?
Yeah, you're right. The capital markets does have a huge impact on that. And what was interesting on those is that and you don't need to pull it back up, Wyatt, but it said decades, when those buildings were constructed, and most of those were 2020 and after. So and that's not surprising, because you started in 2007. I was just a little bit before you. Back then, a 1 million square foot building wasn't very common at all. Like a 1 million square foot building went up in 2010. Everyone was like, that's a monster. But now they're common. There's so many of them that have been built. And I heard an interesting theory the other day. Curious your thoughts on this. I said that a lot of these landlords it's institutional for the most part. It's not me and you pooling our money together and going and building a 1 million square foot warehouse. It's large institutional funds. So they don't necessarily want to do a lower lease rate because it's going to erode their value. They might not even be able to do it because they might have to enter into a negative cash flow situation with the cost of debt. So what a lot of these big funds are doing, because they're so well capitalized, is they're just saying, we'll just wait. So if we have to sit on this vacant for 18 months, it's going to suck, but we'd rather wait until the market comes around, until that supply gets absorbed, new construction is down, assuming there's a pickup in activity again. At some point it's going to lease. So they're almost taking the mentality, we are just going to sit on it. That is our game plan, is we're not going to lower the rate to do the deal. Does that kind of make sense as a narrative for how these guys are thinking?
That's very true from our experience. I mean, the guys that are doing it, they're very, very well capitalized. And you're right, they're taking a little bit of a longer term perspective, most of them. So yeah, we're seeing that. We have not seen any panic in our market, even with the big stuff like that. And there's been enough activity here that there's been reason for some optimism, and there's even more now between Q4 and what we're seeing in Q1 here. But I don't know that that's the case for all the markets. We are most of these guys, in 2021 or so, need to go, hey, we've got 500,000 square foot user. We split it up, and a lot of times they wouldn't even consider splitting it up then. I think that's a different dynamic now. Even with the guys that do have a long-term perspective, they're going, yeah, we'll figure out something, whatever makes good business sense. Sure, we'll demise it now. A lot of those guys were waiting on Amazon or whichever company in that region was kind of filling that gap for those million square footers.
Yeah, it's funny how just the development community works in general, that they catch wind of a big trend, and we'd all be guilty of this too if we were in that space. Is you see that demand is going crazy, and companies are leasing space before it's even built because they don't want to have inadequate amount of warehouse space if there's another boom. So they went through all this demand, and we saw it in 2021 where there's a shortage and companies couldn't even find space. So the developers just go in and almost overbuild as a reflex. And now we have to chew through it. One thing that it has caused an issue with, and this is a challenge in my mind, is that it does create that disparity between when a research company, CoStar or whoever it is, a brokerage firm, whoever goes out and says, okay, well, here's the vacancy rate for Chicago, and they go and post, let's say 6%, just using an arbitrary number, and that's a market-wide vacancy report. But that doesn't dive into all the 1 million square foot buildings that might be vacant versus trying to find a 3,000 square foot bay in that market might be close to impossible. How do you square that circle when, and maybe that's Trip that's having to deal with this, but when a company says, well, I want to lease a 3,000 square foot bay, but I'm seeing that the vacancy rate is 6%, and I'm seeing all these for lease signs. I'm seeing all these massive warehouses. What do you do to square that circle?
Yeah, I mean, I think as part of our job is to be good advisors. And to be a good advisor, you got to do a little bit of a teaching sometimes. Okay, here's the data, and here's why that's a market overview, that's 6%. But when we get here, that it's 1%. And I think that was really a driving force on some of our space analytics stuff that we've done as well. So you just got to educate. You got to show them what's out there, and you got to narrow the list.
What do you think, knowing that nobody has a clear crystal ball, what do you think 2025 has in store, giving headwinds and tailwinds and all kinds of winds that we get told are coming?
Listen, there's a lot of optimism in the market. I mean, I feel like, the end of 23, beginning of 24, it was the last half and the first half. It was a little bit frustrating because that there's deals out there. That there's companies that are investigating markets and properties, but they're not making any decisions. There was just a complete just stall mentality. The Q3, Q4, that started to break loose and change. And so that momentum that we saw in the last half of last year, at least in the Southeast, it feels like people are getting back to business. And, this is not a political commentary at all, but like there's an optimism about business here that is going to continue to drive some of the manufacturing here. And that there's going to be some good things that happen in business for at least the first half of the year. Now there's some implications of that and tariffs and some of the other things, but we don't have transparency in the back half of the year. But hey, I'm gonna call it. I might be wrong, but I think the back half of the year is going to be pretty healthy for us. I don't know that it's going to be gangbusters, but it's going to be pretty healthy for us. So I really feel good about 2025 and where we're headed. Hey, we got a lot of product, and a lot of those big companies need to move quick. And so I think for our market in particular, we've got a lot. We're checking all the other boxes, and we're kind of selling it like, well, we can move quick with it. You want a 400? We got a 400. You want a million? We got a million. What do you need? Don't know if I have a 3,000 square foot made, but I got a million for it.
Well, it does speak to the fact that markets are always going to try to rebalance. And in 2020, 21, there was clearly a landlord's market where they could dictate terms, and companies either had to step up and match it or they didn't get the space. It shifted in relatively quickly to now being a tenant's market. And while that's not great for landlords, that's great for tenants, because now companies actually do have choices. Just like you said, you want 300,000 square feet, you want 1 million square feet, we could give you a number of options to look at. So if we do go into a big uptick, and I agree with you, I sense it as well. It does seem to me that companies are enthusiastic about moving forward now, whereas the last couple of years, it was almost they were forced into a choice. Their lease was coming up, or they just decided that they had to do something. It actually seems like companies want to do something right now. So I'd be optimistic that there's going to be a really solid year ahead of us as well. And tenants have choice. And I think that really is a good message because it's certain tenants. You're right. A 3,000 square foot tenant might have a hard time right now, but any logistics companies is going to have a lot of options. And that's a good thing for allowing these companies to ebb and flow and move and expand as they require without being forced and shoehorned into something. If you're good with it, I'd love to actually just get your thoughts on what makes a good functional warehouse logistics center. And using just an arbitrary company, again, someone from Los Angeles, their business has grown considerably. Maybe they're similar to like a 3PL, and they want to now include somewhere in the East Coast. What would you describe a good building on what you'd want to put in front of them? And assuming that they perhaps don't know, maybe the first spot that they leased was in California, where they just got a building that happened to work, but they didn't really go through that whole process of site selection and evaluating what makes a good versus a bad building. So how would you set that up for a company that does want to expand, has a business already, but perhaps hasn't gone through that full site selection or building analysis perspective?
Yeah, I think first of all, you got to help them build a scorecard. I mean, at the end of the day, these companies kind of go, hey, we need to do something. We're not sure where to go. And a lot of times they don't have real estate expertise or transportation expertise. inside the company. So yeah, you need to find the right partners. You need to build the right scorecard. What does a win look like, and why are we expanding or moving? And then this the whole adage location, location, location. What that means in terms of supply chain and a distribution center is, can I get trucks in and out? Is there a flow there, or is there any risk in getting in and out and that in terms of traffic or something being cut off that's going to be a business interruption or delay? And then the second piece of the locations, can I get the labor? Can I get good workers to come here? Or can I go into a place where I'm going to pay them what where I'm set up to do, and without creating a low turnover because I got too much competition. So there's a little bit of a balance there. And then you get the buildings, the quality. I mean, the buildings are intentionally generic so they can be adapted. So I don't know, the modern Class A buildings, 32 to 40 foot clear, depending on the size of the buildings. There's not a lot of distinction between that, but there is distinction between the developers and the approach they're taking. And I'm not talking about, we like this guy, we don't like that guy. I'm talking about, okay, what's our business goal? Why are we moving? What does this match with? And then here's, they need to understand the different mentalities in the merchant developer, the long-term hold, the REIT, the kind of the institutional money, or, is it a private individual, depending on the size. So you cook all that in there, and the building is one of the variables in that. But if you check all the boxes, and then you got a building that's got great flow, and it's generic enough that you can adapt it to your need, whether it's cross dock or rear load, et cetera, and trailer parking, those things, then you can get into the specifics about the building.
One thing that I've been following quite closely over the last 2 years is just the electrification of everything. And now it's also evolving into the automation of everything and the AI integration. And all of this is going to come with a considerable amount of power. Whereas 20 years ago, these buildings were built with very little power considerations in mind. It basically just enough to keep the lights on, maybe if some auxiliary power, but certainly not at the level where they could be plugging in these massive machines and automation systems. What are you hearing from groups when they perhaps try to future-proof the location, or from a developer who's trying to future-proof the building? Are they starting to take power considerations into mind and contemplate the implications of not having enough power?
Yes, I think you're hitting on something that is very, very, very relevant for any of the development going forward, is the power capacity. And it's not just understanding, okay, here's what's here today. It's understanding, can I expand this? And it's becoming more and more likely that your tenant's going to demand more. And then that it's also becoming scarce, right? Duke Energy is one of the primary providers in the Carolinas, and they're great to work with, but they're also got to look at this and go, hey, I got limited capacity. I'm only going to give you 400 amps in this building day one. If you need more, then bring me the tenant and we'll do a load sheet and we'll figure that out. Whereas in the past, you could push for a little bit more and pay for the equipment, and the developers could say hey, we could boast, hey, we've got 2,000, 4,000 amps, whatever they wanted to put in there day one. It may help them attract another tenant. I think that there's a deeper need for an understanding on the front end of these capacities for the sites now. And I think that comes in even before they build the buildings. It's the site selection process for these developers. I mean, we're regularly seeing somebody that comes in and says 10, 20, 30 megawatts or more for manufacturing. And then you get into the data-driven stuff that you're leading to, the data centers, the AI. I mean, they may be 100, 200 or more. And it's not out there. I mean, you're powering a whole city at that point for one project. And then you got to get into the ripple effect of the developer, the economic development guys and the community. They want that. It's a lot of infrastructure. It's a lot of, investment. That's great. It's not a lot of jobs, and it's tapping, kind of a scarce resource. So that's going to be interesting to watch how that is handled over the next, decade.
Well, especially because North America as a whole has been trying to phase out coal. We have had zero appetite for new nuclear power. And you contrast that to China, where at one point they were putting in a new coal facility every 2 days. And they've got 50 some nuclear plants in different stages of development. And in North America, we're like, we'll solve that problem with just wind, maybe some solar, and probably burn a whole bunch of natural gas. But we're having this massive increase in power demand, and the supply, I just don't understand where it's coming from. So I agree that I think this is a looming problem that isn't being discussed enough. And I do think this causes a lot of problems. I did want to talk on data centers because this is probably the thing that comes up more than anything that I'm talking with people about right now. That and small bay industrial and data centers on the farthest end of the spectrums. But the data centers is crazy. And what I don't think most people appreciate is that even a small data center, I shouldn't even say small, a data center 5 years ago, 20 megawatts was their power requirement. That was like an average data center. If you had a really big one, maybe it was 50, maybe it was 100 megawatts. Now you're seeing some of these pop up where gigawatts are being tossed around. And the rough math on this is that a gigawatt, assuming that the voltage stays constant, a gigawatt is 2 million amps of power, which a average building, like a large building, might have 2,000 amps of power. So and like you said, it's a small city. I've heard different math on it, but something the equivalent of a gigawatt of power is 800,000 homes. So it's a crazy amount of power that could go into one single building. Are you seeing developments and ideas pop up in the Carolinas? Because I know we are. Like everybody seems to be talking about data centers, but where is this power going to come from?
That's a great question. And that's why it's creating a gold rush for the sites that have the infrastructure, across North America to even be able to do that. So there's that piece of the conversation where there's people, they're finding these unicorn sites and marking them up times 20, the land sites, and it's a rounding error for the data centers. And then where does it come from? I don't know. The nuclear has to be in the conversation for this at some point. And then part of that we've learned about and had a little bit of exposure to is these SMRs, these small nuclear reactors. Are you familiar with those?
Yep.
So what I find entertaining but kind of scary at the same time is you've got these little SMRs that are supposed to be making them safer, and there's some technology that I'm not an expert on or even intelligent enough to explain it, but where they're less dangerous and less controversial, supposedly the science behind it. But and then you've got these big neighborhoods, you've got these big communities, and they want all the modern conveniences. They want to be able to check their Google. It's going to be interesting to see, because these same people that these NIMBYs, not in my backyard, they don't want a nuclear reactor in that backyard. And that's reasonably understandable. Supposedly the technology's better. Supposedly they're less dangerous. I don't know. But then at the same time, those same people are demanding more and more data in their daily lives, whether it's their phone, their computers, their social media, whatever. So I don't know how we reconcile that. So I don't have an answer for you. I got more questions. I'll share your question for them, I guess.
Yeah, I've got so many questions too. The one thing that I'm trying to be forward looking on is I think natural gas is the solution in the interim, because it'll take 10 years to even get a new nuclear reactor out if we did that. And I think those small nuclear reactors will have similar challenges where it's easier. And I agree with you, they're not as controversial, but I think the regulatory issues and red tape surrounding that and the NIMBYs, there's going to be so much opposition to it that I see that being a very long and bumpy road, whereas natural gas is already there. Like it's abundant. I'd be long natural gas. It's something that I think in the next 5 to 10 years, we might even start seeing shortages of that, because that is really the only solution. Solar isn't advancing at a high enough pace to keep up with it. Wind, hydro, it's good now, but it's not going to keep the same exponential pace of the demand growth. So I think natural gas fills that gap, but I'm with you. I've got so many questions on it as well.
I agree on natural gas. I think that's underutilized. The reality is we got to pull from everywhere we can pull it from.
Yeah.
I think I broke up with gas. I'm a little on natural gas too. I think you're 100% right. But the reality is we got to pull it from every source we can right now to keep up, even try to keep up with the demand that's out there.
Completely agree. And one thing that I've been talking to a lot of people about over the last few years, and it's been mostly on deaf ears, although there are a few companies that are starting to do it, is to look at solar, and not even for solar on warehouse roofs, and not even from the standpoint that the green initiative, I think a lot of it is greenwashing from that standpoint. By the time you factor in mining the raw materials and transporting them, manufacturing them, the industrial waste at the end, I think that the green angle on solar is very misconstrued. But I think from just a standpoint to what you mentioned is we need to get power from anywhere that we can. If you're an owner of a warehouse right now, or you're developing something, even if you don't decide to put solar on right now, I would recommend at least making it solar ready. So whether that's ensuring that there's enough structural capacity to make sure that it can be added, or whatever it is, I think solar from the standpoint of at least having additional power could be the difference between a user not having enough power for their operations and being able to satisfy that. So I think solar is a huge opportunity for warehouse owners to take advantage of square footage on the roof that's otherwise not even being used. Are you seeing any companies do solar?
Yeah, we have seen that a little bit, but it's not so much in the Southeast. We've had some friends and some clients do that. It's really more, we've seen that on the West Coast. There was actually an example project where it was in California, and the solar company came to one of the developers, I think it was ZBEC, and they said, hey, we want to put solar on the roof. And well, we don't want to avoid our warranty, and we don't want to do this. Like, how about this? We'll take care of the roof, and we'll take care of the liability for the roof. Let us put that up there. And it basically contributed to reducing the basis for these guys in their building. And they checked some of the the ESG boxes, and they got another power source for their potential tenants. So I thought that was a really an interesting win-win scenario there.
Yeah, I think it's incumbent on developers and businesses to look at that as an option, because right now the grid's fine. The grid can handle what's being demanded on it for the most part. But as we start adding more of these data centers, and there's many that are being planned that are going to demand gigawatts of power, we're going to see a strain on the grid that I just don't think is ready for it. So I think companies and developers would be wise to at least have that as an option, that if push comes to shove and there does start to be an allocation of power, you'd be very thankful that you had an extra auxiliary supply. So yeah, I think that'll be just something interesting to watch. What else are you seeing? Do you see any other trends developing? Like we talked automation, talked AI integration and power. Are you seeing any other trends or hearing anything from guys?
Yeah, a couple things that I bring up the discussion. One is, reshoring is kind of a stale term because we've been talking about it, for several years now. But I think it's very real, and it's going to continue. So I think what we're seeing is we're still seeing not only companies migrate within North America or the U.S. kind of to the Southeast. We're seeing a lot of these companies that are reshoring are going, okay, where do we need to be, or where do we want to be? And that's kind of tapping into the Southeast. So we're still seeing a lot of manufacturing projects. We've got the automotive cluster here, but the Southeast is pretty diverse in terms of what they're making. There's a lot of advanced materials. There's this kind of some of the derivatives of the textile industry, chemicals industry is very strong here. So there's still a lot going on here. And then the life sciences are growing outside of the Raleigh, the research triangle. So that's one trend that we're still seeing a lot of. They chase labor, they chase power, they chase,
Lost you again there, Trey. Just as we're waiting for Trey's internet connection back. Yeah. Oh, hey, no, it happens to me regularly.
We need a data center is still out here, or at least in our office. Well, what's going on? I was talking about the manufacturer, the reshore, but I think another thing that's really interesting and very real time is this tariffs issue. Well, what happens with that? and how does that affect manufacturing? And does that, consumer prices probably goes up if that happens. We know that's passed on, but does that actually expedite some of the companies moving their operations here? And then I don't know if you saw or read, and I'm not an expert on this, but the global minimum tax conversations that are happening with some of the G7, and then that means they're going to continue to go seek low tax asylums like good business would do. And so between those three trends, I think there's, for somebody like me and you that just nerds about the data and how's this affected and beyond, hey, is there a deal there? This is just interesting. I'm kind of fascinated to see how that goes. All that kind of confluence comes together.
Yeah, you're right. Reshoring has become such a buzzword that it's almost a cliche at this point, but I echo your comments completely. It's real. And I think one of the biggest drivers that will come on why I think we're going to need much more manufacturing in North America is because right now, the reason we started exporting so much manufacturing to China back in the late 70s, early 80s was because of labor. If you can pay somebody to a penny on the dollar versus what you're paying them here, then it just makes sense economically to do that. But as we start getting more automation and robots and the Tesla Optimus, which can move now and have dexterity with the fingers, that technology will only get better from where it is today. So I think that will in itself spread that wage gap for where it just no longer makes sense to do it in China because you can have automated here. So the labor actually gets removed from the equation. So I think we're going to have a massive boom of manufacturing for that reason. And it's not necessarily going to be job creating because I think the reason to bring it back and like you can even see this right now, like the CHIPS Act and the Inflation Reduction Act, that was primarily for high-tech manufacturing, semiconductors and gigafactories and battery production. We didn't see a textile company be like, oh, okay, we're going to take $1 billion and we're going to make t-shirts here again with that money. That was all high tech. But I think the next decade with the advance of automation and removing that labor element, I think we need a lot more manufacturing space. And if I were to make a prediction, big box warehousing was the storyline of the last 5 years. I think manufacturing is going to be the storyline for the next 10 years plus.
I think you're right, and that bodes well. Going back to this market, well, about 50% of our industrial real estate is related to some kind of process or value add or manufacturing. It's not just distribution. And so I think that is going to be in our favor here in the Carolinas, especially in the upstate of South Carolina. So I think that trend continues.
I need to make a trip to the Carolinas now. I need to see this firsthand.
We got industrial real estate. We got good barbecue. We got usually have a little bit of sun, although it's been kind of a cold snap here. So we'd love to have you down anytime, man.
Yeah, I'd love to. Well, thanks so much for joining me on this call. If anyone has questions for Trey, please feel free to put it in otherwise into the chat. Otherwise, Trey, I'll leave it to you. It's a closing message. If people want to reach out to you, connect with you, asking any questions about the Carolinas, what's the best way to get in touch with you? And then any closing words that you'd want to have as well.
Yeah, I would love to continue the conversation. Trey Pennington at CBRE. My email is trey.pennington at CBRE. Pretty simple. And, I think in closing, I would go back to the fundamentals of the upstate of South Carolina. I think that there's a lot of growth and good days ahead. And I think we're just an example of a lot of places. And so we'd love to continue the conversation about that or anywhere else. So we appreciate you having us on, Chad. And I really, really appreciate what you're doing, man. I love it. The data's good. Conversations are good. And it really kind of opens up a greater dialogue across North America, especially with some of the guys you've had on and beyond. So it's always good content. Thanks for all you do for it.
I really appreciate that. And next time we'll do it in person because, I'd love to do a part 2 on this. Vish says thanks. And likewise, I'd double down on that. Thanks so much for sharing your insights on this. And hopefully I can catch up with you at a future SIOR event as well. That'd be cool too.
Yeah, we'll plan that. Thanks, man.
Awesome. Okay. Well, thanks again, Trey. Thanks for everybody that tuned in and have a great weekend all. And we'll see you next week.